In this video, I will talk about the Associated Press style rules for addresses and streets. In this video, we'll talk about two AP style entries, addresses and highway designations. Some related entries that you may want to look at include numerals and capitalization. There are also some short entries for street, avenue, boulevard, road, and terrace, but everything that's explained there is covered in the address and the entry for addresses. Okay, this is a really important concept, and it's very important that you understand this distinction before you go any further. Okay. AP has different rules as far as what you're supposed to do when you have an address as opposed to a street name. When we say address, what we mean is there's a building number with the name of a street. So 901 South National Avenue is an address. If we were to say National Avenue or South National Avenue, those are street names. Okay. So the key point here is that the building number is the distinction. If there's a building number there, that makes it an address. And if it's an address, that means we do certain things that we don't do when it's just a street name. Okay. And the rest of the video will kind of explain that. Okay. In an address, there are really four elements to that. You've got a building number. Second element is a directional word. Usually, some streets wouldn't have a directional word, but if there's one there, that's one of the elements. Then what we would call the name of the street, in this case, national, in the example we're looking at. And then the last word, which I'm going to call the type of street. So the word that describes the type of street here is avenue. All right, those are your four elements. One important thing to note is that when I say South National Avenue, AP looks at that phrase and says that all of those words are integral to the proper name of that street. So they're all capitalized, including avenue, which is a common noun. But when you use a common noun and it becomes an integral part of a proper name, then all the words get capitalized. Okay, hope that's clear. This is the easy stuff, I think. The building number in an address always uses figures. So in these examples, 5 Park Avenue, 10 Downing Street, even if it's only 1 digit or 2 digits, it takes a figure for the building number. That's pretty straightforward. The name of the street is always capitalized, as we mentioned, and just follow the normal rules on abbreviations. So as a general thing, the names of streets are going to be spelled out. An exception that leaps to mind would be a street like St. Louis Street or St. Louis Avenue, because AP would call on you to abbreviate Saint in the construction St. Louis. So it'd be ST period LOUIS. But other than that, that name of the street is going to be spelled out. What happens if the street name is a number? We're going to come back to that. I've got a slide for that. Okay, so the directional word. This is that second of the 4 elements in the name of an address, or in an address. If there's a building number there, therefore it's an address, then that directional word is abbreviated. So in all these examples, we have a building number, and you'll notice that the directional words, south, east, or northwest, they're abbreviated. The only difference is this northwest, which is what we would call a bidirectional word. It's 2 directions, north and west. AP basically says, don't use periods in those unless it's customary local usage where you live to use the periods. I wouldn't get too hung up on that idea. But abbreviate, if there's a building number there, abbreviate the directional word. In a street name, which again means there's no building number, never abbreviate the directional word. It just gets spelled out. So all the same examples as before, except now the building number's gone. South spelled out, east spelled out, northwest spelled out. Okay, so it's an if-then situation. If there's a building number, do this. If there's not a building number, do that. Okay, so type of street. This one's a little bit tricky, so you got to pay attention. In the column on the left, there are 3 specific types of streets: avenue, street, boulevard. Street, avenue, boulevard. That's the way I remember them. I don't know why. Street, avenue, boulevard. Those 3 in an address get abbreviated. If they're not in an address, if they're just part of a street name, they are spelled out. Okay, does that make sense? Building number, abbreviate street, abbreviate avenue, abbreviate boulevard. No building number, spell them out. Okay, take a look at that right column. All of these other types of street names that are listed here are never abbreviated. If there's a building number, spell them out. If there's no building number, spell them out. So if you see drive abbreviated DR period in AP style, that's incorrect. If road is written RD period in AP style, that's incorrect. Does not matter if we're talking about an address or a street name. I included highway on this list because highway is also spelled out 100% of the time in AP style, but I have a couple of slides related to highway designations that we're going to get to in a minute. So if we're looking at a situation where the name of the street is a number. So here's the logic on this. The general AP style rule on numbers is that 0 through 9, we would write them out as words, and 10 all the way up to 1,000,000, we would use figures. So just apply that same logic to the names of the streets that are numbers. First, so that's the number 1, right? First is spelled out, F-I-R-S-T. Same thing with 9th Avenue. But starting with 10th, remember we're into 2 digits now, those get written as a mix of figures and words. So figures for the street name, I mean. The only difference is these are ordinal numbers, so we do need to use the little TH or RD or ST on the end of the word, and end of the figure as appropriate. So 10th is 10th, 51st is 51st. Okay, makes sense? 151st. That's how it works with names of streets if they happen to be numbers. Highway designations are a little different in that regard. When we start talking about highways, we're just going to use figures for everything, even if it's 0 through 9. So US Highway 1, a fairly famous road in the Western United States, that's written as a figure. Highway 60, Highway 160, they're all written as figures. 2 ways to do interstates. You can say Interstate Highway 44, or you can just say Interstate 44, and both are considered acceptable on first reference. I didn't put this on the slide, but on second reference, you're allowed to say I-44 with a hyphen if you want to. The jurisdiction part of the highway, this is a little bit tricky. This part gets capitalized if it's a proper name. So for example, it's a federal highway, US highway, we capitalize US for United States in all uses. It's a proper name. That's pretty straightforward. Same thing with Kansas Highway 126 or Missouri Highway 126. You would capitalize the board Kansas or Missouri. The one that's a little bit odd, and I put it in here because the style book specifically tells you to do this, but if you, in the context of a story, were to say something happened on State Highway 126, the way that AP looks at that is that state is not a proper name, and so therefore it's lowercase. Now, I mean, that's what the style book says, so that's the AP rule. I suppose you could look at this and say, well, it feels like State Highway 126, that state is an integral part of the name of that road, so maybe it should be capitalized. You're not wrong if you think that that's logical, but that's not what's in the book. So anyway, I'm just telling you what the rule is. The style book does not address this situation. What if you were dealing with something called County Road 219 or County Road 219? Personally, I think I would capitalize county. It feels like an integral part of the name. Where I live, there are roads called Farm Road 164, things like that. And you would definitely capitalize both words, farm and road, as an integral part of the name of that road. All right, so to wrap up, here's some examples of correct usage. 901 South National Avenue, it's an address, so you notice South and Avenue are both abbreviated. If I say South National Avenue, no building number, so everything's spelled out. Same thing with Harrison Street or Harrison Road. But again, we throw that building number back in there and abbreviating happens. Okay, South Harrison Street. 1300 South Harrison Drive. Notice drive is spelled out because it is not one of the magic 3 that get abbreviated. Even if they are long words like 3200 East Chestnut Expressway. I know expressway is a lot of letters, but it's not one of the magic 3, so it gets spelled out. 5 Park Central Square. You got a digit, a single digit there for the building number, but it's written as a figure. US Highway 71. Notice highway is not abbreviated. Interstate 435. Do that on first reference. On second reference, you can say I-435 if you want to. All right. I hope that was helpful information on AP style for streets and addresses.